The rip of paper was the only sound that mattered. It was a brittle, final sound, a punctuation mark of pure malice that cut through the sterile hum of the Chicago O'Hare terminal. Passengers in the boarding line for Pinnacle Airlines flight to Dallas flinched as if a whip had cracked. Brenda, the lead flight attendant, held the confetti of what was once a first-class boarding pass in her manicured fingers. She dropped the pieces to the floor, a triumphant smirk twisting her perfectly painted lips. The young woman she had targeted, a black woman in a simple grey peacoat and jeans, stood frozen. A circle of humiliation had formed around her, a bubble of shocked silence in the river of travelers. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her dignity shredded as thoroughly as her ticket. Gate agents looked away, pretending to be busy. A few passengers whispered, their phones held low, recording the ugly spectacle. Brenda basked in the moment, a petty tyrant savoring her small, vicious victory. But what Brenda didn't know, what no one in that terminal could possibly know, was that the woman she had just publicly degraded wasn't just another passenger. She was the one person in the entire country you never, ever want to see looking too closely at your airplane. She was a federal investigator, a ghost in the machine, and Brenda had just handed her the keys to bring an entire airline to its knees. The pre-flight checklist was over. The investigation had just begun. The air in Terminal 3 was a familiar cocktail of stale Dunkin' Donuts coffee, industrial disinfectant, and the low-grade anxiety of 1,000 strangers in a hurry. It was 5:45 a.m., and the winter sun had yet to stain the grey Chicago sky, but the terminal was already a churning vortex of humanity. Maya Reynolds navigated the chaos with a quiet, practiced economy of motion, her standard-issue black roller bag gliding obediently behind her. To the casual observer, Maya was utterly forgettable. At 28, with her hair pulled back into a simple tight bun and wearing no makeup, she looked like a graduate student on her way to a conference. Her clothes were functional, anonymous, dark jeans, comfortable boots, a worn but clean peacoat. This deliberate invisibility was her most crucial professional tool. It allowed her to see things without being seen. Maya wasn't a student. She was Dr. Maya Reynolds, a senior materials engineer and airworthiness investigator for the Federal Aviation Administration. Her specialty wasn't passenger complaints or unruly behavior. It was far more terrifying. She was part of a small, elite, and widely feared unit that investigated maintenance fraud and the use of unapproved or counterfeit aircraft parts. She was, in essence, a hunter of catastrophic failures before they happened. Her grandfather, a mechanic with the Tuskegee Airmen, had taught her that an airplane's soul lived in its logbooks and its safety in the integrity of its smallest bolt. It was a lesson she had built her life around. Today was supposed to be a simple positioning flight. She was heading to Dallas to begin a week-long surprise audit of a third-party maintenance facility used by several major carriers. But for Maya, the job was never truly off. Every flight was an observation. Every sound, every vibration, every interaction was a data point. She arrived at Gate K-12 just as the pre-boarding announcement crackled to life. The gate area was a controlled scrum of elite status flyers and first-class passengers, all jockeying for position. Presiding over it all from behind the podium was a flight attendant, who seemed to radiate an aura of profound dissatisfaction. Her name tag, pinned with military precision to her starched uniform, read, "Brenda." Maya recognized the type instantly. Brenda was in her mid-40s, with frosted blonde hair, sculpted into an immovable helmet, and makeup that looked less applied than shellacked on. She wielded her passenger manifest like a scepter, her eyes scanning the waiting crowd with a look of undisguised judgment. Maya watched, her professional curiosity piqued, as Brenda berated an elderly couple for asking a simple question about their connection. "Sir, this information is on the departures board. You are holding up the line for our premier passengers." Next, she turned her attention to a young family. "That car seat will have to be gate-checked," Brenda snapped, gesturing at a clearly FAA-approved model. "I don't care what the sticker says. I make the final decision on this aircraft." Maya made a quiet mental note. Pattern of behavior: arbitrary and confrontational application of policy. The younger gate agent, a man named Tim, looked deeply uncomfortable but said nothing. Brenda was the queen of this small fiefdom, and she ruled by intimidation. Then, the call for first-class boarding began. Maya, holding a full-fare first-class ticket paid for by the U.S. Treasury, moved to join the line. Brenda's cold blue eyes latched onto her immediately. They performed a swift, dismissive inventory, from Maya's practical boots to her simple coat to the color of her skin. A tiny, cruel smile played on Brenda's lips, the smile of someone who has just confirmed a long-held prejudice. When Maya reached the podium, Brenda held up a hand, palm out, stopping her cold. "Hold on. This is for first-class passengers only." Her voice was pitched just loud enough for those nearby to hear, turning Maya into a spectacle. "Good morning," Maya said, her own voice even and low. She presented her printed boarding pass. "I'm in seat 3A. Brenda didn't even glance at the paper. Her gaze was fixed on Maya's face. "I'm sure you think you are. But the main cabin hasn't been called yet. You need to step aside and wait for your group." The implication was as clear as it was ugly. "You don't belong here." "I'm not in the main cabin," Maya repeated, a new firmness hardening her tone. "I'm in first class, seat 3A. If you just scan my pass, you'll see." "I don't need to scan it," Brenda retorted, her voice rising with irritation. The passengers behind Maya were beginning to mutter. "I know who my first-class passengers are. Now please, move along. You're delaying people who actually paid to be here." An older man in a tailored suit behind Maya finally spoke up. "For heaven's sake, just scan her ticket, and let's get on the plane." Brenda shot him a look that could curdle milk before turning her venom back on Maya. Being questioned by one of her real first-class passengers had pushed her over the edge. This young woman, in her plain clothes, had defied her authority. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice now stripped of all warmth. It was the flat, precise tone of an investigator. "Per the contract of carriage, you are required to scan my valid boarding pass. Failure to do so without a documented, security-based reason constitutes a denial of boarding." The legalese landed like a physical blow. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. "Excuse me? Who in the hell do you think you are, talking to me like that?" "I'm a passenger," Maya said simply. "In seat 3A. Scan the pass." Seething, Brenda snatched the boarding pass from Maya's hand. She jammed it under the scanner with a violent, stabbing motion. The machine beeped, its green light flashing approvingly. "Reynolds M seat 3A Group 1. For a fleeting moment, naked shock registered on Brenda's face. It was instantly consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. She had been publicly proven wrong. She shoved the boarding pass back at Maya. "Fine," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I hope you enjoy the complimentary nuts. I'm sure you're used to getting things for free." Maya took the pass, her fingers brushing Brenda's. She met the flight attendant's hateful glare with an unblinking, analytical gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm. "I will." She turned and walked down the jet bridge, her back ramrod straight. She could feel Brenda's eyes boring into her coat. She was no longer just a passenger to Brenda. She was an enemy. As she stepped onto the aircraft, Maya mentally opened a new file. Gate procedure violation, overt racial profiling, hostile employee conduct. She had a feeling the file was going to get much thicker before they reached Dallas. The incident at the gate wasn't an ending, it was an overture. Maya settled into the plush leather of seat 3A, a spacious pod by the window. She took a slow, deep breath, consciously walling off the anger and humiliation. That was the passenger. The investigator had work to do. Brenda's words stung, the casual cruelty of them designed to diminish, to invalidate. You don't belong. It was a poison she had learned to metabolize long ago, but it never lost its bitterness. She watched as the rest of the passengers boarded. She saw Brenda stationed at the aircraft door, her face a mask of saccharine sweetness for the white passengers, her smile dimming to a curt, dismissive nod for passengers of color. The performance was as blatant as it was practiced. Maya pulled out a small, government-issued tablet and opened an encrypted file. She logged the date, flight number, airport, and employee name. FAA Brenda. Last name unknown. She documented the entire gate encounter with the detached, precise language of a federal report. She noted Brenda's exact words, the presence of witnesses, the reaction of the other gate agent. As the last passengers trickled on, Maya began her routine in-flight inspection. Her eyes weren't looking for comfort or convenience, they were searching for anomalies. She scanned the cabin interior, her gaze lingering on ceiling panels, emergency exit markings, the latch mechanisms of the overhead bins. It was second nature, a constant, low-level hum of professional vigilance. That's when she saw it. It was a tiny detail, something no ordinary passenger would ever notice. On the leading edge of the engine cowling, visible through her window, was a row of fasteners. One of them, just one in a line of 24, was wrong. It was a subtle difference in the sheen of the metal, the depth of the Phillips head cross. The standard-issue fasteners were cadmium-plated steel with a dull, faintly golden finish. This one was zinc-plated, brighter, more silvery. A cold knot formed in Maya's stomach. It could be nothing. A sloppy but approved field replacement. Or it could be a sign of something far more sinister. A counterfeit part. A cheap, uncertified piece of metal holding a critical piece of the engine together. The cabin door closed with a pneumatic hiss. The safety briefing began. Maya tried to push the thought away, to dismiss it as professional paranoia, but her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. The little things are the big things, Maya. An airplane doesn't have opinions. It only has the truth of its parts. As the plane pushed back from the gate and the engines spooled up with their familiar, powerful whine, Maya felt something else. A vibration. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A low-frequency shudder felt more in her bones than heard with her ears. It was slightly out of sync with the normal resonance of the CFM56 engines. Her paranoia sharpened into genuine concern. She knew the resonant frequencies of most commercial jet engines by heart. This was off. It was subtle, but it was there. The wrong fastener. The odd vibration. 2 data points. Not enough for a conclusion, but more than enough for alarm. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off as they climbed through 10,000 feet. Brenda and another flight attendant began the cabin service, their cart rattling down the aisle. When Brenda reached Maya's row, her plastic smile was firmly back in place. "Something to drink this morning?" she asked, her tone dripping with false civility. "Just water, please," Maya said, "and I have a question for the flight deck." Brenda's smile tightened. "The captain is very busy during the climb. I can take a message." "I need to speak with him or the first officer directly," Maya said, keeping her voice low and calm. "It's a safety concern." Brenda's eyes narrowed. This was a classic power play from a difficult passenger, in her view. "Ma'am, if you have a complaint about your treatment at the gate, you can file it on our website after we land." "This isn't about the gate," Maya said, her patience fraying. "This is about the aircraft. I felt an unusual vibration on takeoff, and I believe I saw a non-standard fastener on the number 2 engine cowling." Brenda stared at her for a long moment, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A fastener? Honey, are you an aircraft mechanic?" "I have a background in engineering," Maya said, deliberately understating her qualifications. "Well, I'm sure that's very impressive," Brenda sneered, her voice now carrying to the surrounding seats. "But I think you should leave the flying to the professionals. We have a team of licensed mechanics who check these things. Now, did you want that water or not?" This was the moment of decision. Maya could push, create a scene, and risk being labeled a hysterical passenger, or she could back down and spend the next 3 hours praying that the tiny, silver-headed screw wasn't holding on to a part that was about to tear itself apart at 35,000 feet. Her grandfather's face flashed in her mind again. "You see something, you say something. Period." "I am not a mechanic," Maya said, her voice now carrying a new weight of authority that made Brenda pause. "But I'm telling you, as a passenger on this aircraft, that I have a credible safety concern. I need you to relay my specific observations to the captain immediately. That is your legal duty under Federal Aviation Regulation 121-533. The citation, so specific and arcane, hit Brenda like a bucket of cold water. It was the second time Maya had quoted regulations at her. This wasn't a complaint anymore. This was a challenge. Brenda's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "All right," she said, her voice dangerously sweet. "You want to talk to the captain? You'll talk to the captain." She turned on her heel and marched toward the front of the plane, her movements stiff with anger. She wasn't going to the cockpit to relay a safety concern. She was going to report a disruptive, delusional passenger. Maya watched her go, the cold knot in her stomach tightening into a ball of ice. She had just escalated the situation from a personal conflict to a potential command-level incident, and she was about to find out just how badly Brenda wanted to win. A few minutes later, a tall, silver-haired man in a pilot's uniform emerged from the cockpit, a deep frown etched on his face. He was followed by Brenda, who stood behind him with her arms crossed, a look of vindicated righteousness on her face. The captain's eyes scanned the first-class cabin until they landed on Maya. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Miller," he said, his voice a low grumble of impatience. "Brenda tells me you have some concerns about my aircraft." The entire cabin was now silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. "Yes, Captain. Thank you for coming," Maya said, remaining seated but meeting his gaze directly. On the ground, I observed what appeared to be a non-standard, zinc-plated fastener on the number 2 engine cowling. And during takeoff and climb, I've been feeling a low-frequency vibration that seems inconsistent with normal engine resonance for this model. Captain Miller listened, his expression shifting from annoyance to weary skepticism. He looked at Maya, a young woman in jeans, and then at Brenda, his senior flight attendant of 15 years. "Ma'am, are you an A&P mechanic?" he asked, using the industry term for a certified airframe and power plant technician. "No, sir," Maya said. "My background is in materials engineering." "I see," he said, the condescension in his tone barely veiled. "Well, I can assure you, this aircraft was cleared by our maintenance team in Chicago this morning. We have some of the best mechanics in the business, and I can tell you from up front, all my instruments are green. The engines are performing perfectly." "With all due respect, Captain," Maya pressed, "some structural vibrations wouldn't necessarily register on the AICIS displays. And a single counterfeit fastener—" "Counterfeit?" The captain cut her off, his eyebrows shooting up. Brenda smirked behind him. "Now hold on. That's a very serious accusation to be throwing around. Are you accusing my maintenance crew of negligence?" "I am stating my observations," Maya said, her voice firm. "And I am formally requesting that you log them and consider diverting to the nearest suitable airport for a visual inspection as a matter of precaution." The request hung in the air, audacious and unprecedented. Divert a flight with 170 passengers because of a feeling and a shiny screw? Brenda saw her opening. "Captain," she interjected, her voice laced with manufactured concern. "This passenger has been a problem since the gate." She was argumentative. She accused me of profiling her, and now she's making up these wild stories. Frankly, she's making me and the other passengers feel unsafe. She seems unstable. It was a masterful, vicious move. She had reframed Maya's legitimate safety concern as the paranoid delusion of a disgruntled, mentally unstable passenger. Captain Miller looked from Brenda's theatrically worried face to Maya's calm, intense one. He was a man of checklists and procedures, of clear data and unambiguous instrument readings. He had a schedule to keep, passengers to deliver. This situation was messy, subjective. He made the decision that required the least amount of paperwork. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now cold and final, "I am the pilot in command of this aircraft. My instruments, my co-pilot and I all agree that this plane is perfectly safe. I consider your accusations to be baseless and disruptive. I'm going to have to ask you to refrain from discussing this further. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have no choice but to have you restrained and met by law enforcement upon our arrival in Dallas." The threat was stark and absolute. He had sided with his crew. He had dismissed her. "Captain," Maya said, one last time, her voice low and urgent. "I need you to understand the potential consequences of ignoring a potential catastrophic failure." "That's enough," Brenda snapped, stepping forward. "You heard the captain. You are done. You are a danger to this flight." Captain Miller gave Maya one last, hard look. "Consider this your final warning, miss." He turned and walked back to the cockpit, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing the decision. Brenda stood over Maya's seat, her eyes glittering with triumph. She had won. She had not only put the upstart passenger in her place, but she had also had her authority validated by the captain himself. She leaned down, her voice, a poisonous whisper, meant only for Maya. "You should have stayed in the back of the plane where you belong," she hissed. "Now sit there, shut your mouth, and try not to cause any more trouble for your betters." She straightened up and walked away, her hips swaying with arrogant victory. Maya leaned her head back against the seat, her heart pounding. She had failed. She had followed protocol, voiced a credible threat, and been shut down. She looked out the window at the massive engine, a miracle of engineering held together by thousands of parts, all of which had to be perfect. All she could see was that one single, shiny screw. For the next hour, she sat in tense silence, her senses on high alert, analyzing every pitch and yaw of the aircraft, every subtle change in the engine's tone. The vibration was still there, a persistent, unnerving hum beneath the floor. Had she overreacted? Was it just paranoia? The self-doubt was a corrosive acid. Then, a new sound began. A faint, high-pitched whistling. It started and stopped, almost too high for the human ear to register. But Maya, trained for exactly this, heard it clearly. It was the sound of air moving at high velocity through a space it shouldn't be. It was the sound of a crack. The ball of ice in her stomach became a singularity of dread. The fastener wasn't just wrong. It had failed. The cowling panel it was securing was likely coming loose, creating a fissure. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She had to try again. She stood up and started toward the front galley, just as Brenda was emerging. "Where do you think you're going?" Brenda demanded, blocking her path. "I told you to stay in your seat." "There's a new noise," Maya said, her voice tight with urgency. A high-frequency whistle from the right engine. "The panel is failing. You have to tell the captain now." "Oh my God, you are insane," Brenda said, rolling her eyes. "You are not to move from your seat again. That is a direct crew member instruction." "This is not a joke." Maya's voice rose, a tremor of fear finally breaking through her composure. "That engine is in danger of a catastrophic failure. We all are." Her raised voice attracted the attention of the entire cabin. Passengers were staring, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. "That's it!" Brenda snarled, her face a mask of rage. This was the ultimate act of defiance. "You're done." She grabbed the intercom phone. "Captain Miller to the forward cabin immediately. We have a Code 3 disruptive passenger. She's hysterical." Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit again, his face thunderous. "What in God's name is going on now?" "She's out of her seat, Captain," Brenda cried, pointing a trembling finger at Maya. "She's screaming about the engine failing. She's scaring the passengers. She needs to be restrained." The captain looked at Maya, who stood pale but resolute in the aisle. "Ma'am, I gave you a final warning." "Captain, please just listen," Maya begged. "There is a whistling sound. The cowling is compromised. I know what I'm talking about." Just then, a loud bang echoed from the right side of the aircraft, followed by a violent, sickening lurch. The plane shuddered violently, and the cabin was filled with the screams of terrified passengers. The whistling noise was gone, replaced by a deafening roar. Maya grabbed onto a seatback to steady herself. She looked out the window, and her blood ran cold. A huge section of the engine cowling had torn away completely, exposing the turbine machinery beneath. Debris had struck the fuselage and the wing. The cockpit door flew open, and the first officer yelled, "Engine 2 has failed. We have a fire indication, and we're losing cabin pressure. We need to descend. Now." The plane banked sharply, a controlled but terrifying dive. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, dangling like grotesque puppets. The cabin was a symphony of chaos, alarms blaring, babies crying, people praying. In the midst of the pandemonium, Maya's eyes met Brenda's. The flight attendant was frozen in the aisle, her face a deathly pale mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The triumph was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the horrifying realization that she had been wrong. Utterly, catastrophically wrong. The woman she had dismissed, humiliated, and threatened wasn't just a passenger. She was the one person who had tried to save them all. And now, at 20,000 feet and falling, it might be too late. The descent was a controlled chaos, a terrifying symphony of roaring wind, shuddering metal, and the frantic, shouted checklists from the cockpit. Maya, back in her seat with an oxygen mask strapped to her face, was preternaturally calm. The fear was a cold, hard stone in her gut, but her mind was clear, analytical. She was watching the wing, assessing the damage from the uncontained engine failure. The leading edge was dented, but the main spar appeared intact. The flight controls seemed responsive. They had a chance. Captain Miller, his voice strained but steady, came over the PA system. "This is the captain. We have suffered a failure of our number 2 engine. We have shut it down and extinguished the fire. We are descending to 10,000 feet and diverting to Des Moines International Airport. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of your flight attendants." The flight attendants, to their credit, moved through the cabin with a forced, professional calm, helping passengers with their masks, securing the galley. All except one. Brenda was still in the aisle, clutching a seat back, her knuckles white. Her eyes were wide with a vacant, shell-shocked horror. She was useless, paralyzed by the very disaster she had refused to prevent. 20 agonizing minutes later, the plane, crippled and roaring, slammed onto the runway in Des Moines. The landing was hard, but safe. A fleet of fire trucks and emergency vehicles raced alongside them, dousing the smoking engine in foam. As the aircraft slowed to a stop at a remote part of the tarmac, a collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the cabin. They were alive. But for Maya, the incident was far from over. As soon as the evacuation slides were deployed and passengers began to deplane into the flashing red and blue lights, she unbuckled. She wasn't heading for the exit. She walked calmly to the front of the aircraft where Captain Miller was now standing, his face ashen, his uniform soaked with sweat. "Captain," Maya said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a thunderclap in the suddenly silent cabin. He turned, his eyes locking on hers. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out look of shock and dawning comprehension. "You," he whispered. "You knew." "I tried to tell you, Captain," Maya said, her voice devoid of accusation, stating only a fact. "My name is Dr. Maya Reynolds. I'm a senior investigator with the FAA's Airworthiness Directive and SUP's division." She reached into her coat, pulled out her wallet, and flipped it open. The gold and blue medallion of the Federal Aviation Administration gleamed under the emergency cabin lights. Her credentials, stark and official, sat beside it. Captain Miller stared at the badge as if it were a venomous snake. The blood drained from his face. He had not just ignored a passenger, he had ignored a federal officer. He had not just endangered his flight, he had personally piloted his career into a brick wall. His eyes flickered past Maya to Brenda, who was now being helped into a seat by another flight attendant, sobbing hysterically. She told me you were unstable," he stammered. "She lied," Maya stated simply. She turned her gaze to Brenda. The flight attendant flinched, as if struck. The terror on her face was now mixed with a new, more potent emotion. The dawning horror of absolute ruin. "This aircraft is now a federal investigation site," Maya announced, her voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. "No one is to touch anything. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder are now federal evidence. Captain Miller, you and your first officer are to remain here. You are both grounded, pending a full investigation." She then looked directly at Brenda. The sobbing stopped, replaced by a choked gasp. "As for you," Maya said, her voice dropping to an icy, precise whisper, "you are being relieved of duty, effective immediately. Your actions today did not just constitute a failure to perform your duties. You actively interfered with the reporting of a credible safety threat. You lied to your captain. You placed this aircraft and every soul on it in mortal danger through your gross negligence and personal prejudice. When we get off this plane, you will be met not by the airline's HR department, but by federal agents." Brenda stared at her, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The entire edifice of her petty tyranny, her self-importance, had been obliterated. She wasn't a powerful flight attendant anymore. She was a woman who was about to be swallowed whole by the consequences of her own hate. Maya turned back to the captain. "I need the maintenance logbooks for this aircraft. Now." Still reeling, Miller numbly pointed to a case in the cockpit. They're in there." Maya walked into the cockpit, retrieved the thick binders, and returned to the cabin. She opened the most recent logbook. Her eyes scanned the entries, her mind working with lightning speed. She found it within seconds. An entry from 2 nights ago at O'Hare, replaced NATO 17 fastener on Na2 engine cowling fan blade access panel, part number 7MB204. Work performed by mechanic R. Jones. "Captain," Maya called, her voice sharp. Miller looked up, his face a mask of dread. "Who is R. Jones?" "Robert Jones," he mumbled. "He's one of our senior mechanics in Chicago." "And was this work signed off by a supervisor?" Maya asked, her finger tracing the empty signature line. It should have been," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. Maya knew. The missing signature, the single replacement part, the counterfeit fastener she had spotted. It all pointed to one thing: maintenance fraud. A mechanic had likely used a cheap, unapproved part for a quick fix, pocketing the difference from the certified part's cost, and had skipped the supervisory check to avoid getting caught. It was a small act of greed that had almost led to mass casualties. She closed the logbook with a snap that echoed through the quiet cabin. She looked at Brenda, whose face was now a mess of smeared mascara and tears. "You didn't just ignore a warning, Brenda," Maya said, her voice resonating with the weight of the near tragedy. "You tried to silence the one person who saw the rot in the system. Your prejudice almost killed us all." She walked to the open aircraft door, where firefighters and NTSB agents were now gathering. She paused on the threshold and looked back at the scene of her near death and her vindication. The terrified passengers, the shell-shocked crew, the disgraced captain, and the utterly broken flight attendant. "Enjoy your investigation," she said to no one in particular, and stepped out into the cold Iowa air, leaving the wreckage of multiple careers behind her. The flight was over, but her work had just begun. The makeshift command center was a sterile, windowless conference room in the Des Moines International Airport Administrative Building. It was now 11:00 a.m. For the past 3 hours, the room had been a hive of activity, smelling of burnt coffee and high-stakes tension. Maya sat at the head of the table, no longer the anonymous passenger, but the undisputed authority in the room. Her peacoat was gone, replaced by the crisp, severe silhouette of a dark blazer she kept in her go-bag for exactly these situations. Across from her sat a grim-faced delegation from Pinnacle Airlines, who had been scrambled onto a corporate jet from their Dallas headquarters. The vice president of flight operations, the head of corporate security, and a team of ashen-faced lawyers. On a large monitor, the airline's CEO stared out, his face a carefully composed mask of concern. In chairs along the wall, Captain Miller and his first officer sat in stunned silence, awaiting their formal interviews. Brenda was in a separate room down the hall with 2 FBI agents, her union representative having already told her, in no uncertain terms, to say nothing. "Let me be perfectly clear about the sequence of events," Maya began, her voice cutting through the room's tense quiet. She had the maintenance logbook open in front of her, next to a high-resolution photo of the failed engine part that had been recovered from the runway. At approximately 600 Central Time, I was subjected to an unprovoked and discriminatory denial of service by your lead flight attendant, Miss Brenda Jensen, at Gate K-12 at Chicago O'Hare. The airline's lead counsel, a man named Harris, immediately tried to intervene. "Investigator Reynolds, on behalf of the airline, I want to extend our most sincere apologies for the conduct of one rogue employee." Maya held up a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Harris, you will have an opportunity to issue apologies later. Right now, you will listen. This is no longer about one employee's behavior. This is about a catastrophic, systemic failure that your employee actively concealed." She methodically recounted the entire incident. The initial confrontation, her observations of the fastener and vibration, her attempt to relay the safety concern, Brenda's dismissal and lies, her escalation to the captain, and his subsequent disastrous decision to trust his crew over a stated safety concern. "Your captain," she said, looking directly at Miller, who flinched, "chose to believe Ms. Jensen's assessment that I was an unstable and hysterical passenger over a specific technical observation. He chose the path of least resistance and, in doing so, breached his primary duty, the safety of his flight." She then turned her attention to the logbook. Which brings us to the cause. This logbook entry shows a single fastener replacement on the failed panel, performed by mechanic Robert Jones. The work was not countersigned by a supervisor. My team on the ground in Chicago has already secured the maintenance facility. They have interviewed Mr. Jones. He has confessed. A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Jones admits to having used a non-certified part he purchased online from an unauthorized overseas supplier. Maya continued. The voice that cut through the sterile air of the Des Moines conference room was as cold and precise as a scalpel. "The failure is not his alone," Maya said, her gaze of physical weight pressing down on the assembled executives from Pinnacle Airlines. She saw them not as men in expensive suits, but as a collection of compromised systems and deferred responsibilities. "A corporate culture that incentivizes on-time departures over rigorous safety protocols is not a culture. It is a time bomb. A training program that allows a crew member's documented history of prejudice to fester without consequence is not a program. It is an accessory to a potential crime. Mr. Jones was not a rogue actor. He was a symptom of the disease you cultivated." She rose from her chair, the movement slow and deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the HVAC system and the frantic, silent work of the airline's lawyers scribbling on their legal pads. "Therefore, as of this moment, under the authority vested in me by Federal Aviation Regulation Part 119, I am issuing an emergency suspension of Pinnacle Airlines operating certificate. Your entire fleet is grounded, indefinitely." The CEO on the large video screen, a man named Sullivan, whose tanned face had paled to a sickly grey, finally broke. "Dr. Reynolds, with all due respect, grounding our entire global operation, the economic impact would be catastrophic. It would destroy the company. Surely a more surgical approach is warranted. We can ground the A321 fleet. We can overhaul the Chicago maintenance hub." Maya stopped her pacing and placed her hands flat on the polished table, leaning forward as if to climb through the camera and into his boardroom. Her voice dropped to a low, intense register that was more terrifying than any shout. "Mr. Sullivan, at 10:14 this morning, I watched a mother in seat 12B try to explain to her 6-year-old son why the world outside his window was on fire. I watched a businessman in 5D, a man who probably flew 3 times a week, sobbing into an oxygen mask. The economic impact you are so concerned with is the price of their terror. The surgical approach you're begging for is what got us here. One cheap screw, one lazy mechanic, one hateful employee, one compliant captain. 1,000 tiny cuts that almost bled out 178 souls over the Nebraska plains." She straightened up, her eyes sweeping from the CEO's stunned face to the disgraced pilot sitting against the wall. "Captain Miller," she said, her tone shifting from prosecutorial to something colder, more analytical. "You had ultimate authority. You are the final failsafe. When I presented you with specific, technical observations, you chose to accept the character assessment of a flight attendant over the data. Why?" Captain Miller, a man who had been the picture of command just hours ago, looked utterly broken. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Brenda, Ms. Jensen. She's been with the airline for 20 years. She was my lead. I trusted her judgment of the passengers." "Her judgment of the passengers," Maya repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Not her judgment of engine resonance or metallurgical integrity. You didn't trust her expertise. You trusted her prejudice. You saw me, you heard her, and you made a calculation based on appearance and her manufactured narrative. You didn't fail your instruments, Captain. You failed your humanity. The NTSB will recommend the permanent revocation of your ATP license. I will personally sign that recommendation. Your career is over." Miller visibly crumpled, burying his face in his hands. There was no satisfaction in it for Maya. There was only a profound, hollow ache. She turned her attention back to the screen. "Mr. Sullivan, this is what comes next. You will grant my teams unrestricted access to every aircraft, every hangar, every office, and every record in your possession. We will conduct a top-to-bottom audit of your entire operation, from parts procurement to crew training. We are not looking for Mr. Jones's counterfeit fasteners anymore. We are looking for the rot in the roots of your company. You will not fly again until I am satisfied it has been purged, and you will prepare for the largest civil penalty in the history of the Federal Aviation Administration. This is not a negotiation. It is a directive." She walked to the door, her footsteps echoing in the tomb-like silence. She paused with her hand on the handle. "My full preliminary report will be transmitted to the NTSB, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Justice within the hour. I suggest you instruct your legal team to focus not on fighting this, but on surviving it." She exited without a backward glance, leaving behind the smouldering wreckage of a corporate empire. The hallway was a stark, fluorescent-lit corridor. Down the hall, a door opened, and Brenda Jensen emerged, flanked by two plainclothes FBI agents. Her uniform was rumpled, her face streaked with ruined mascara. The helmet of blonde hair was disheveled, revealing the dark roots beneath. When she saw Maya, her expression of shocked victimhood curdled into a mask of pure, venomous rage. "You!" she spat, her voice a raw, ragged thing. "You did this! You ruined my life!" The agents tensed, but Maya held up a hand, stopping them. She walked slowly toward Brenda until they were only a few feet apart. She felt a strange, detached calm, the way a scientist might observe a specimen. "I didn't do anything, Brenda," Maya said, her voice quiet, almost conversational. "I just bought a ticket. I just tried to take my seat. You did all the rest." "It was a misunderstanding," Brenda insisted, her voice rising to a hysterical shriek. "You were rude. You were aggressive. I was protecting my flight." "No," Maya said, shaking her head slowly. The denial was fascinating in its completeness. "Let's be precise. You saw a black woman in a simple coat trying to board first class, and your entire worldview short-circuited. You couldn't accept the possibility that I belonged there. So you decided I didn't. You tried to humiliate me, to put me in what you thought was my place. And when I didn't break, when I didn't shrink, you escalated. When I tried to warn you about a safety issue, you didn't hear a potential problem. You heard a challenge to your authority from someone you had already deemed inferior." Brenda stared, her mouth agape, the furious justifications dying on her lips. "You didn't see an engineer," Maya continued, her voice relentless and even. "You didn't see a passenger. You saw a target for your resentment. You lied to your captain, not to protect the flight, but to win, to put me back in my box. Your prejudice was so powerful, so blinding, that you were willing to bet everyone's life on it. You looked at me and decided that your need to be right was more important than the possibility that 178 people might die. Tears of rage and self-pity streamed down Brenda's face. They won't believe you. I have a perfect record. They already have the testimony of 3 other first-class passengers who witnessed your behavior at the gate, Maya stated flatly. They have the statements from the other flight attendants, who are finally free to speak about your long-standing pattern of harassment and discrimination. They have the cockpit voice recorder, with your own words calling me unstable and hysterical. They have everything, Brenda. What you have is the rest of your life to sit in a federal correctional facility and think about the choices that led you there. Maya stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you know what I'll remember most about today? Not your insults, not the captain's dismissal. I'll remember the sound the cabin made when the engine blew, that collective, terrified scream. You should listen to it on the recording. It was the sound of your victory. Brenda flinched, as if physically struck. The last of her blustering rage collapsed, leaving behind a blank, hollow-eyed horror. She had finally been forced to look into the abyss of her own making. The agents gently took her arms and led her away, a woman so consumed by a petty hatred that she had become the architect of a near massacre and her own complete ruin. Maya watched her go, feeling not triumph, but a deep, weary sadness. It was a pathetic and toxic waste of a human life. She turned and walked away, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The immediate crisis was over. The long, grueling work of untangling the web had just begun. 8 months later, the air in the newly christened Pinnacle Horizon maintenance hangar in Dallas smelled different. It was the clean, sharp scent of hydraulic fluid and ozone. But beneath it was something new, the smell of fear. Not the terror of a crisis, but the institutional fear of getting it wrong. It was the smell of accountability. Maya walked the polished concrete floor alongside Maria Flores, the airline's new VP of Safety and Compliance. Flores was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, poached from a rival carrier with a reputation for militant adherence to protocol. The cultural shift is the real challenge, Flores was saying, gesturing toward a team of mechanics huddled around a disassembled engine. We had to terminate 67 employees across the maintenance and ground crews, not for fraud, but for attitude, for clinging to the old get-it-in-the-air mentality. We started celebrating mechanics who ground a plane for a minor issue. We give bonuses for finding problems, not for on-time departures. And the reporting system? Maya asked, picking up a newly certified turbine blade and examining its serial number against the manifest on her tablet. Completely anonymous and routed directly to my office, Flores confirmed. We get 20 tips a week, from suspicious log entries to gate agents reporting pressure from management. 90% are nothing. But 10%. 10% are the shiny screws we would have missed before. An older mechanic, his hands stained with a lifetime of grease, approached them cautiously. Dr. Reynolds? Ma'am. He nodded to them both. We finished the full teardown on the last of the Tulsa-serviced engines. The issue in Tulsa had been the first major discovery of the audit, a third-party maintenance facility consistently miscalibrating torque wrenches, leaving hundreds of critical components slightly under-tightened across dozens of aircraft. It was a subtle, creeping failure that would have inevitably led to another disaster. Anything new? Maya asked. No, ma'am, the mechanic said. All the fuel line connectors have been replaced and torqued to the new spec, but we found something else in the historical logs. From before. He handed her a tablet. On the screen was a maintenance entry from 3 years prior. It's an avionics software patch, The entry says it was installed, but there's no corresponding digital certificate in the system. It's like someone just typed it in. Maya and Flores exchanged a look. It was another thread, another potential point of failure hidden in plain sight. "How many aircraft received that patch?" Maya asked quietly. 112, the mechanic replied. Flores swore under her breath. "Ground them! Ground all of them now!" As Flores hurried away, barking orders into her phone, the mechanic lingered. He looked at Maya, his expression one of quiet gravity. "My son-in-law was on that flight," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Flight 712. Sat in 24C. He called my daughter from the tarmac in Des Moines. He told her he was alive because someone on the plane wouldn't back down." Maya felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had seen the passenger manifest, but had deliberately avoided learning about the individuals. They were data points, souls she had a duty to protect, but to know them felt like a weight she couldn't bear. The mechanic extended a calloused hand. It wasn't clean, but Maya took it without hesitation. His grip was firm. "For 30 years I came to work and did my job, but I also kept my head down. We all saw things, knew about the corner cutters. But you didn't just find a broken part. You broke the whole damn system open so people like me could finally do our jobs right. You gave us our pride back." He cleared his throat. "Thank you." He let go of her hand and walked back to his engine, leaving Maya standing alone in the vast, echoing space. That was the only monument she would ever get. It was the only one she wanted. Later that night, in the quiet of her anonymous hotel room, Maya sat by the window, looking out at the distant lights of the DFW runways. The television was on, muted. A news report was showing file footage of Brenda Jensen, haggard and in a prison jumpsuit, having lost her final appeal. It was a ghost of a story, a footnote in the nation's memory. But for Maya, it was never over. She closed her eyes and could still feel the sickening lurch of the plane, still hear the roar of the shredded engine. She carried the weight of it, a cold, heavy presence in her soul. It was the price of her vigilance. Her grandfather's voice drifted into her memory, as it so often did. "An airplane has no conscience, Maya. It can't tell you when it's been betrayed. That's your job, to listen for the lies." The lies weren't just in the counterfeit parts or the forged logbooks. They were in the dismissive sneer of a flight attendant, the weary condescension of a pilot, the calculated risk assessment of an executive. They were lies of prejudice, of arrogance, of greed. Her job was not just materials engineering. It was a form of human engineering, forcing systems and the people within them to confront the deadliest of their flaws. A plane thundered into the night sky, its lights ascending toward the stars. A collection of strangers, strapped into a metal tube, hurtling through the darkness, held aloft by nothing more than physics and a fragile, sacred web of trust. Maya opened her eyes. The exhaustion was still there, but beneath it was a bedrock of resolve. The web had been torn, but it could be mended. One thread, one flight, one shiny silver screw at a time. The hunt was endless, and she was still watching.